Okay, the Siyata Dishma, we're now going to start the sixth emotion, the sixth to last emotion, and that is, of course, the emotion of Yesoid. That's where we're holding in the chain of events. And in our little diagram, which we have devised in our heads of the triangles, this is the middle of the third triangle, which means foundation. That's the literal translation, of course, of Yesoid, is a foundation. Now, this tool of Yesoid, as we will learn, Be'ez Hashem, is going to be the foundation for all of the other emotions that we've been learning about until now. And the truth is, if it sounds like I'm going over many points again and again, which you may have found by the other, the other emotions as well, then the reason that is the case is because I think it just makes it clearer. The more we define it in different terms, in different ways, it does make things a bit clearer, especially when we're trying to define the emotions in a real way and also in a practical way. So let's try to get to the raw energy. Let's try to get to the definition, the essence of this wonderful Yesoid emotion. Now, each of, as we know, we mentioned at the beginning, each of the 10 emotions correspond physically to different parts of the body. Yesoid is represented by the organ of reproduction, procreation. And the question is why? Why is the emotion of Yesoid represented in the body as the reproductive organ? So the definition of Yesoid is, I guess in one word, if we wanted to sum up the word Yesoid, it's bonding. It means to give over, to connect to something or someone else. And this connection to another person or another event is the transition between my world and the world of someone else, whether it's another human being, because it's a relationship, or whether it's another experience or event that's outside of myself. Now, be very, very careful, even though we have not yet clarified, but I want to make clear already now, disclaimer, that this is not to be confused with next week's, the seventh emotion, which is going to be Malchus, which is the actual delivery and the implementation of the actual everything we've been discussing until now, which we'll get to next week, but don't confuse the two. We'll get to it. Now, before we get to that Malchus, which we'll get to next week, which is absolutely the most crucial one we have to get to of all, we have to understand and form the connection between the Mashpia and the Makabel. So that's really what's going on. So in the Sifrei Kabbalah, it's quite clear that the first 5 emotions that we've been dealing with until now, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, and Hod, are emotions that I feel inside me. So for example, I feel loved. I feel determination, right? I feel humble. These are feelings that we have inside ourselves, right? These are emotions of a person as they exist in a person, as a person. What they don't do is they don't form a relationship with anyone or anything. Why? Because all of the 5 above are about how I feel, but they don't form a connection or relationship to anyone outside of myself. That's the difference. Yesoid and Malchus are the only 2 emotions that allow these emotions to basically relate to someone or something else. So step 1 is the power of Yesoid, which is the power to connect, to form connection, to form a bond, which is why we now understand why it's represented in the physical body as the organ of reproduction, which is, once again, forming a connection physically to someone else. Now, you find this in a small way, maybe I'll give another example. You find very, very clever people, very, very clever people, ultra clever people, extremely intellectual people, and they just can't connect to people. They find almost we look at it like a socially off situation. They're like socially off, but it's not necessarily the social that's the problem. It's the connection, it's the side that they're missing in their, very good that they've got the intellect, but they're missing the basic idea of your soul, which is to actually form the relationship, which you can understand is such an important thing to do in everything we do. And again, it doesn't only mean relationship in a person, but it can be a relationship in an event or something, an experience going on around us. Because the energy of Yesoid is a bonding and connection, which is, by the way, once again, why it's in the middle of the triangle. Why is it the middle of the triangle? Because if you remember what we said all the way back by Tiferes, we explained that it's impossible to go out of my world until I have the middle. I could be chesed, I could be gvura, but unless I have tiferes, unless I have that middle, I've never gone out of my world. My world is chesed, my world is gvura. Tiferes allows me to step back, if you remember, and go into someone else's world. Let's explain that just for a moment, because it's very negay over here as well, because it's also the middle of the triangle number 3. So, for example, people are very, very right. They're very loving, very giving, very open, very accepting. All of these we spoke about, right? Or, for example, they're very gvura, which means they're very restraining, holding back, whatever. All of the emotions we explained over there. Now, both of those will not lead anyone to leave what I'm feeling, right, and have a sense of what someone else is feeling. Right? It's not about me, but it's rather about the situation and what the situation around me or outside of me requires. Now, without Tiferes, that is almost impossible to accomplish. We explained that already, right? Now, Kabbalah tells us, by the way, that the middle line, by the way, goes through all 3. Obviously, it goes through the first triangle, the second triangle, and over here we're dealing with the third triangle. And Sifrei Kabbalah, it says clearly that the middle of the triangle is the essence of who we actually are. The middle of each triangle gives me the ability to step back from the intensity of the situation or the relationship that I personally am very invested in and very involved in, and I'm noted towards, because we're either that way or that way. So we naturally, we're born with this natural natia towards a specific emotion, and we're attached to it, but we have to step back and figure out what the goal is, right? We said the marshal, if you remember, of the minister and finance, right, and the Minister of Economy, and each one is so invested in he's not thinking about the country in general. They take it back to the king, and the king says, hold on a minute, you have to remember what you're here for and what the goal is. Step back and figure out what's best for the country, not for yourself. So that was what we said by Tiferes. So yes, it's true. There are many people that have the ability to do that. They can step back what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're noted towards, and they're able to feel someone else, but that's Tiferes. They don't have Yesod. That's the problem. They don't have Yesod. That means they have the middle quality in number 2. In other words, they can be Tiferes in triangle number 2. They can have that midah. They can step back and say, I know what needs to be done for the situation around me, not necessarily what I want to do. That they can have. But the problem is they're so caught up with everything else, they can't actually do it. They can't make that connection, and that's Yesod. Right? It's a practical connection. It's a connection with the environment around me and allows me to be able to do what needs to be done. Right? Tactless people. There are many people that are just tactless people. They have no tact, right? They can say something and it's like all wrong, and they figured out it's wrong, but they haven't made the connection because they might feel what needs to be said, but they can't make the connection with someone else to know what that person needs to hear or whatever the situation requires. Therefore, that's Yesod. Yesod is the connection between me, someone else, or something else, right? Just on a simple level, if you have a teacher or a rebbe or whatever it may be, or speaker even giving a speech, anything like that. So he's carefully planned the whole speech. He's got it all figured out. He knows not about what he wants to say. He knows what the audience needs to hear. That's Tiferes. He stepped out of the chesed. He stepped out of the gvur that he might be noted towards. And now he's figured out Tiferes calls me to say, I need to know what the audience need to hear. And he's all figured out. He's got the whole paper. Everything's great. But he doesn't connect with the audience. He doesn't connect with who he's talking to. So he can have all of the chokhmah. He can have all of the Tiferes. But if he hasn't got Yesod, he's never connected with someone on the outside. He'll make everything a big mistake. He'll make the mashal wrong. He'll say something that's not relevant. He'll say something that's a big problem that they'll come out confused because that doesn't talk to me. It's not connected. And by the way, you can ask people that have been dealing with this situation. They'll tell you that sometimes to connect with the audience is what helps the speech, because when you connect to someone on the outside, it's not only Tiferes. Tiferes means, again, figure out the difference between them. Tiferes is to understand not only what I'm noted towards, but what someone else needs. But this is making the connection, the bond between me and someone else, and that's why Yesod is called, and we translated it as foundation. Now, a foundation, a connection, is crucial for any relationship. Any relationship requires connection, whether it's with your wife, whether it's with your children, whether it's with your parents, whether it's with your siblings, whether it's with your friends, whether it's with your roommates. It's irrelevant who it is. A friendship, a foundation of connection is crucial for anything. It's crucial for any emotion. It's for a healthy one, that is. And it's a foundation for healthy living, because then you'll be able to connect to people outside of yourself. And we're living in a world where we're living with other people, so we're going to have to, whether we like it or not, connect it to other people. Now, people can be very netzach and hoid people, which we explained last week. That means they're very determined and they want to get things done and they want to follow it through all the way to the end, right? And they can get very frustrated and angry because they want to make it work. They want to get all the way to the end, but they're missing the awareness of what's going on. And that's what the sixth emotion of Yesod is, the ability to leave my world and connect with the world and people around me. Now, just remember the difference between Tiferes and Yesod can be, sometimes mixed up because it's the idea of going out of myself and going into other people, which is why it's the middle of the triangle, of course. But upon him, Tiferes means more the ability to emphasize with other people around me, to hear what they're going through, to understand what they're going through, that's important thing, to go out of my own thing. That's important. But Yesod is much more practical. Remember, last week we explained the difference between triangle 1, triangle 2, and triangle 3. Triangle 3 is very practical. It is for the people that actually get things done. Therefore, it would follow that the midah of Yesod is a very practical emotion. It allows us to get things done through the bonds and connection we make, remember, with people and with events and situations that we find ourselves in. Now, just like remember we said last week that Netzach and Hoid can be, and primarily are, but not only can be when there's no emotion. We explained that, Netzach and Hoid are sometimes when there's no excitement and love and passion, then Netzach and Hoid can allow us to continue and carry something through all the way to the end. So is true, of course, with Yesod, which fits in the same triangle, because sometimes a person doesn't have Tiferes, but he can still have Yesod. And it might not be as effective, but it's still possible, which means sometimes a person feels nothing for someone else. Now they know that they have to, they're supposed to. I'm supposed to be having emotions right now for someone else. I'm just not feeling it. It's not working. I'm not getting there. I don't feel that. So that's the Tiferes part that they're missing. But they can still have the Yesod part, which is the connection that they can form, the bond that they can form. And once they do that, they can still be as effective, maybe a bit less, because obviously with Tiferes and Yesod, it's even better. But once you've developed your Yesod, you can make that bond. And yes, they work better, Tiferes and Yesod, but if you have both of them, that's great. But if you have one without the other, it can still work, right? Now, sometimes it's good to try to connect to other people, even in the absence of Tiferes, of the feeling for someone else. Like all emotions. All emotions, we said, can be either positive or negative, right? Now, by the way, the normal of the middle line of the triangles, they're normally always positive. By definition, it's almost normally positive. Why not? Why is it that way? Because the very fact that you can leave your personal feelings and your personal tears and your personal, emotions and feel for others and situations that you're in, that's automatically a positive thing. But not always is it positive. Tactfulness, for example, can be used in the negative. Almost, if you remember, like we mentioned by Tiferes, it can be manipulation, right? Like Tiferes can be. And therefore, we have to be very, very careful. Just because it means leaving my world to connect and enter the world of the receiver, it's not always necessarily a good thing. It can be a negative expression of the middle of the triangle of Yesod. Now, let's try to get a little bit practical now. Let's try to get a bit practical. Now, the question is, what happens if a person feels that I don't have this strength? I don't have Yesod. I have a problem with Yesod. I have a lot of other things. I have great emotions. I have Chacham Bina V'das. I have so much. I find it difficult to connect with others, to see that, to connect that bond. And it's a very important thing to develop because in life we have to have relationships with other people. And again, like I said, it's not only human beings, it's also experiences, of course. What if a person doesn't have this strength, right? What happens? What can we do? We've spoken about how a person can channel various emotions. We've spoken about how a person can change and integrate other emotions as well. A person can develop emotions that they never had as well. A person on the left can integrate and bring in the right. A person vice versa from the right can bring in the left and needs to be done that way, as we explained all the way in the beginning. So what happens if a person doesn't have Yesod? What happens if a person doesn't have Yesod? He really wants to. He'd love to. He just doesn't feel a connection to other people that he feels he should be connecting to. How do we strengthen it, build it up in any way, shape or form in the most practical way? So there's two specific things that are important to try to build up in a very practical way, this emotion of Yesod. And that is number one. We'll start with number one. Number one, do it on a very intellectual level. If you build it up on an intellectual level, it's much easier to do it in triangle 1 in the intellectual level than on emotional level. Let's go back to, which we didn't discuss, but we know what it means. Go back to triangle 1. We didn't analyze it, but we all know what it means. In triangle 1, there's also the middle line. There's Chochmah Bina, and the middle line is, of course, Das. Das means, again, same idea as Tiferes and Yesod, but on an intellectual level. That means intellectual awareness. I'm aware intellectually of other things around me, right? Now, there are people in the world that are incredibly, incredibly clever. These people are geniuses. They're brilliant people, but they're incredibly stupid at the same time. There are many people like that. Academically, these guys are way ahead of everyone else. They're amazing. So much chokhmah, so much bina. But they can analyze concepts, ideas. They can figure it all out. Unbelievable brains. These people got brain power. It's unbelievable. It's amazing. They can lecture them. They can give lectures about them. Amazing chokhmah, amazing bina. But the problem is they're incredibly stupid because they don't have the das. Because there's no awareness of what's going on around them. So yes, there's lots of chokhmah, but when there's an awareness that's required of what's going on outside of themselves, all of a sudden, they have no idea. They're lacking completely, but it needs to be developed. And it can be developed. So the very first step, if a person feels that he's lacking with this midah of Yesod to connect, then he has to develop becoming aware, like we said by Tiferes, which is ask myself, what does this specific situation require? Not what I want, not what I need, and not what I feel, but what does the situation around me require? Before you walk into a room or before a situation comes up, right? Whatever it may be, whether again it's a human being relationship or whether it's an event, whatever situation it may be. At the end of the day, what does the outside require? Whether it's the person outside or the experience, what experience is necessary? How can I connect to the situation or the person? And slowly but surely you can start to develop that thought process on an intellectual level, first triangle, which eventually will filter down all the way down to number 2 and of course number 3. Now, if a person, by the way, does not develop the emotion of Yesod, what's the negativity? What's so bad? Play no one of Yesod. What's so bad about it? So, of course, developing connection and relationships and bonds with others is very, very difficult. But much more than that. Much more than that. What happens is you become trapped in your own world. Because all of the first 5 emotions that we were discussing are emotions within ourselves, and they become trapped within us. And therefore, and you can have people that have got very, very intense emotions, intense 5 emotions, but they've got no Yesod, which means they've got the emotion, it just can't get out, and they get very, very frustrated because it cannot be outside of themselves. So the first thing is to be aware. Stop yourself. What's good for the situation? How can I develop a relationship? How can I form this bond that needs to be done, notwithstanding how I feel and what I want? That's very, very important. People often judge relationships to people or situations by what I feel, right? And that's what gets us stuck. We'll mention that in a minute. The second practical thing you could do to try and develop the midah of Yesod is create practical connections with other people. For example, the Gemara says that a person that greets someone else first, the Gemara says is a scholar for a long life. Now, we don't really understand all the scholars, but the Chazal tell us that there's something to greeting someone first. What is the mila of greeting someone first? That if a person wants to work on Yesod, he has to leave aside all of the other emotions, and that's very important because the emotions that we've been working on in the previous weeks they can often stop us from getting involved or deciding if we want to be connected or if we want to form a bond or relationship. In other words, does it feel good? Do I like it? Or how am I feeling? These are all feelings which are very nice and important, but it's those feelings that if you utilize them, which was important to utilize, but if you utilize them over here, sometimes can actually prevent you from actually making that connection and that relationship because I don't feel good. I don't like this. It doesn't feel right. All of these emotions is what stops us. So put aside the other emotions and just work on simply connecting to other people. Create bonds. The Gemara says, be the first guy to say hello to the guy. Do I know him? No. Does it feel good? I don't know. I just met him. Who cares? That's what the Gemara is telling us. Be the first one, meaning put aside everything else and just go in there and make a connection. And that's often a way of a person being able to work on this incredible midah is by practically making connections with other people, even if we don't want to, if it doesn't feel good, I don't like it, he's an angry guy, I'm angry right now, I'm not in a good mood. These are all moods and emotions, which are very important, but not right now when you're using the midah of Yesod. By the way, it's also interesting how this sixth emotion is called Yesod. Now, foundation, generally speaking, when you say the word foundation, and foundation is all the way at the bottom of a building, it's what keeps the rest of the building up. It's the foundation, it's the lower part. And here, yet we're finding it almost towards the end, right? It happens at the end, whereas we would have said the foundation happens first. Why? Because you cannot express all other emotions like love, like endurance and everything else if there's no connection. That's why it's the foundation for everything. And this is very, very important. Listen carefully. This is very important. Yesod means to go out of your world, incorporate someone else's world, and it's very, very, very difficult, if not impossible, to do this unless you're comfortable with your own world. If you're not comfortable with your own world, it's very hard to leave your world and go into somebody else's world. People very often do not make connection. Why don't they make connection? Because they're scared. They're scared to leave their own world. They're scared to leave their own bubble. They create a wall around them. And they have intense emotions inside. They're very emotional people. Or they're very intellectual. But it never gets to Yesod because their world is much stronger. Now, Yesod is very risky, remember? And people don't want to take the risk. People are scared to make connections. People are scared, to do sorts of things. They'll nurture and develop all their relationships and all their emotions. But in their own world, they're happy to, because that's what makes them comfortable. The moment I have to take the next step and go to somebody else's world, that's risky, because I'm making myself vulnerable and I'm setting myself up for maybe even, rejection. And who knows what could happen? I don't want to do that because I'm so worried about my own world because I'm not comfortable with myself. Only when I'm comfortable with myself is when I can then step out of my world and go into somebody else's world, and that's Yesod, and that creates the bonds which allows all of the other 5 emotions that we've been dealing with to be able to be expressed and to be utilized. So the middle line that we're saying in the third triangle, crucial if you want healthy emotions, right? Because we're working over here because our orientation is often either to the right or to the left, but what makes them healthy, as we said by Tiferes, is when we utilize the middle line to take it to the next level, both on an emotional and a practical level of making connection with the outside world and experiences. Remember, everything we said is not only people, but also experiences. We have to be strong, and that's the first step in our own lives, in our own world, to be able to step out of our world to go into somebody else's and make bonds of connection with others. In Mitzvah Hashem, next week, we're going to put everything together and get to the 7th incredible emotion, how to deliver, and that's going to be the emotion of Malchus. Join us then, Be'ez Hashem.